of you do, but some of you may not. I'm going to be reading from Guided, My True Life Story. This book is available in Kindle, paperback, and audiobook, and I read the book myself. You can get it on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. All right. And I have written a total of 5 interconnected books. Today, we're just working with Guided. Okay. And for those of you that don't know, this is a real photograph I took of my spirit guide angel. I call them my light beings. Okay. These are really light beings. You can see that. You can see how transparent they are. When at Christmas time of 1994, but I had seen them my whole life. And when they showed up this time, I happened to have my Nikon camera in hand, film days, and took their photograph. They showed up and there they were in the room, lighting up the whole room, 7 foot tall. And everyone in the room, Christmas time, the kids and everything running around. Nobody saw this but me. I couldn't believe it. And I took the photograph, got back from the trip, got the film developed, and there it was. So they said to me, they came to me in a dream a couple of weeks later, and I asked them, I was lucid. I said, why did you let me take your photograph this time, since I've seen you since I was a baby? They said, you're going to write a best-selling book about relationships and the relationship with them. And we appeared so the world could believe. I wrote this book 20 years after they first told me that in 1994 when I took that photograph. I wasn't ready. All the pieces of my life weren't there yet. This is my true life story until 20 years later, and published it in 2014. It's been a bestseller ever since in multiple categories. And it's an amazing story. All right. It's really a story. It's really your story. It's about how guidance works in your life. Okay. Last week was the 5th episode of Lessons from Guided. Today, I will continue to read from the 137 tips, learnings, lessons, and awarenesses sprinkled throughout my true life story, Guided. Guided is the roadmap for stepping on board at any point along your life path. So you too can join forces with your own spirit guides and angels, creating a better life than you could have done on your own. Just when I thought I was done writing Guided, my guides started to wake me up at 1 a.m. every night for 2 weeks, starting from the beginning of my manuscript, stopping me where they added a tip, a learning, a lesson, or an awareness. They told me these would help the reader understand how guidance works in their life. They told me these are like afterthoughts of reflection on what was really going on in my life while I was living it. Living in 2 worlds, not just this one. This is what consciousness is all about, being aware of what's really going on from this greater perspective. In my training, I show you, like my guides showed me throughout my life, how this works. We're in part 2 of chapter 6 today, because there's so many of these tips, learnings, lessons, and awarenesses in this chapter. In other words, this chapter, things are getting real sketchy in my life. The words of my mother, I'm going to break your spirit and there will be nothing that you can do about it, was getting closer to playing out. I was reaching a boiling point, both at school and at home. For me, this world was getting harder to tolerate. I had to continually watch my back. It never ceased. This is when my mother pushed me to new limits in her attempt to figure out new ways to break my spirit and defeat me. All all while my guides continued to send me this prophetic warning. Life will get better for you if you can make it through childhood. I was beginning to feel the weight of that prediction and that I might not make it through childhood. Their prophecy was now closer than ever. Okay. You know, I have to say that at this point, when I'm reading through this again, I've read through Guided many times with my fan base. And it really does make me, at this point, it's disturbing how nobody ever dared stop my mother. I just want to say this one point. This is the nature of a bully. This is what bullies do. And they intimidate everyone around them and into joining in with them or else. That was my mom. And everybody fell into suit and didn't dare confront her. That's the only reason a bully exists, is when they're not confronted. Look at what's going on in our world right now, you guys. They're bullies. And they need to be confronted. Okay. So I'm really I'm heated up at this point, reading this again, going, God, it just speaks to our times. Okay. 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 So this is the name of this chapter. I'm going to go back to the beginning of it because the first half of this happened last Saturday. Chapter 6, Reaching a Boiling Point. So in this chapter, let's see, I'm moving from 10 to 12 to 13 years old. Okay, that's about where I'm at here. Tip. I'm going to read the tip and then I'm going to read what led up to it. These tips, learnings, lessons, and awarenesses, remember, are designed to wake you up to your guidance. Overcoming things like ostracism and humiliation will make you wiser and clearer, not defeat you. Learning to do this is a skill you will use throughout your life. It can only happen when you observe and don't take things personally. You are never alone. Your guides are there to help. They believe in you. Okay, so here's what led up to that tip. Just before completing the 3rd grade, my mother went to the principal demanding that they hold me back. They told my mother it wasn't necessary and that my grades were satisfactory. But she insisted. So I ended up repeating the 3rd grade. Mom's explanation to me was that I would learn what it felt like to be humiliated when I returned to school in the fall. Nice, huh? Dad was really upset with her, but once again, he couldn't stop her. Later on in the book, you'll see why he couldn't stop her. She had something over his head I didn't even realize until I was 55 years old. I realized that laying low wasn't enough anymore. My mom was determined to deliver a new punishment to me that she hoped would be more effective in humiliating me in front of my peer group. You'll also see why my mom did this when I'm in my 50s. I've realized why she did this to me. Okay. My mother had been right. Returning to school to repeat the 3rd grade was humiliating. It was a dismal year for me. I adapted by becoming even more reclusive. I had never depended on friendships anyway, so it wasn't much of a transition for me. That experience just allowed me to see the behavior of the kids in both grades, the one I would have graduated into and the one I was stuck in. No big surprises, though. The kids were pretty predictable. To them and to the teachers, it just proved that they were right when they judged me as stupid. This converted me into an ultimate observer. That was yet another layer of being alone that brought me even closer to my guides. I may have been alone, but I was not lonely. I was learning much more from them than I could have ever learned in school anyway. So that's what led up to this. Overcoming things like ostracism and humiliation will make you wiser and clearer. You don't have anyone else to waste your time on, basically. All you have is a sobering truth that everyone else seems to be able to slide by. Okay? Okay, now I'm going to get to the next tip. Your spirit guides know everything about you, the life you entered into when you first came here. It's like a movie that's playing out. In my case, they saw that this moment in time could be where my life could get cut short because the obstacles were so great. It was my guide's job to see that I made it past this milestone. They had their hands full. When you try to leave this world and they insist on keeping you here, you know that your life has a higher purpose. And here's how it played out. I don't think this is ever going to be easy for me to read this, I'll tell you. Boy. My family situation got so much harder to live in as the years went by. Aside from the support from my guides, there was no one in this world to turn to who could help me and get me out of here. Just before I hit puberty, my mother's Gestapo tactics went too far. I was completely out of energy to fight her off anymore. Now I'm about 12 years old at this point. I attempted suicide. My mother was taking some sort of pills called Cope, and coping was something I couldn't do anymore. I swallowed all the pills one day at school in the bathroom where I was alone. That's where they found me, passed out on the floor in a bathroom stall. Although this appeared to have been premeditated, it wasn't. I just woke up that morning empty of this world. I had no feelings, no fear, and I never questioned that I wouldn't carry this out. From the moment I took the bottle of pills out of the medicine cabinet, I no longer had a connection to this world. It was like I was already gone. It's interesting to describe how I felt when I didn't feel anything at all. This is ridiculous to read this again. Oh, God. It didn't feel like I was letting go here, but when I look back at this really is disturbing. I can see what you guys mean when you read this book. God. It's just no one ever came to my rescue. No one ever did except my guides. Ugh. God. Ugh. Okay. Oh. All I remember is waking up in the hospital. The first thing I saw and heard was my dad holding my mom back from swinging at me as she yelled out over and over again, it wasn't her fault. She was crazed with anger and rage. My dad had his hands full, and it was all he could do to hang on to her, to keep her from hitting me. It never stopped, you know? Oh, man. I had taken another shot at escaping this life, only to find myself right back where I left off. Again, my lesson was not to run away from any of this. Just keep walking through it. Oh, okay. So it was my guides. Without them, I mean it. I wouldn't have made it. So you guys are not alone. You guys have help. God. Ugh. Okay, and here's the next tip. Be cautious when you see people getting caught up in the drama or excitement of events, just like what's going on right now in the world. Look what's going on. They don't think for themselves. A lot of people are not thinking for themselves. They're just going along with the agenda, along with what they're being told. Okay, instead of doing their own research. Okay, they just get herded along like sheep. It's not even real to them. It's entertainment. Entertainment, watching somebody get hurt, watching somebody get destroyed so somebody else can take over, that type of thing. This is a sickness, you guys. This is really a humanity. It's a sickness in humanity that needs to be resolved. We all need to clean up our act, okay? Observe and sit quietly by yourself to tune into what's really happening instead of just believing everything that's blaring at you. That's where you will find your guides, and they will help keep things in perspective. They will tell you the truth, okay? In fact, your guides right now, your guides are the only ones who are going to tell you the truth. Okay, so I'm going to read what led up to this in my life to give you a perspective on where we are in the world right now. On November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated. I was at school when it was announced, and everyone went into shock. It was like we were bombed or something. My knee-jerk reaction was to be an observer. So I pulled back and I went, wait a minute. Okay, that's what you guys need to learn to do. I could not join them in their mass confusion and shock because something just wasn't right about all that. Does it feel like that to you now? Are you feeling like something's just not right with all this? The lockdown, the coronavirus, the election, everything, you guys, the censorship, everything that's going on in the world, you guys, and it's happening fast. I could not join in the mass confusion and shock because something just wasn't right about that. Everyone was in a hypnotic stupor. They were like lemmings following each other off the emotional cliff, keeping you in fear. I was so removed from the mass hysteria that people thought something was wrong with me. It wasn't that I didn't have feelings or didn't care about our president. I just refused to be part of the hysteria and couldn't wait for school to get out that day. When I got home, my mom was really capitalizing on the event. It just so happened that it was my mother's birthday, November 22nd. And she relished the fact that President Kennedy was murdered on her birthday. Weird. I mean, this just gets weirder, okay? But isn't it getting weirder in our world? Truthfully, no matter what side you've chosen, what side you're on, or if you're just on the fence, it's weird, you guys. This is the weirdest. I had left the school mass hysteria to come home to another bizarre situation. It's like we can't get away from this stuff. It's right in our faces. A few months after the assassination, the Beatles came to America for the first time. It was called an invasion, but it was really a cult happening where people don't think for themselves. Hello? The reaction from my generation was weird. It was so intense that it actually scared me. I was very defiant toward it. I was not a Beatles fan. I was an observer as I watched the kids get into drugs, lose their minds, and become followers. Think about what's going on right now. We were all conditioned to follow. It's dangerous. I became even more isolated from the lost souls of my generation. To them, I was a dork. But I was comfortable with myself and didn't need them in my life. Throughout my childhood, I learned to be good at that. I wasn't inclined to get involved with their mindless cult behavior. My music of choice was Motown music, and it wasn't a cult or an invasion. It was a movement. So that's what led up to that tip. So start thinking for yourself, do your own research, and get quiet. And start writing in your journal about what's going on with you every day. This is how I did it. I started my journal writing at 7 years old. So here's another tip. The worst thing about someone taking something away from you is when they don't tell you why they did it. It's because they aren't playing fair. At least you got the experience and learned from it. It's all about the experience and not dwelling on what could have been, especially when you have no control over it. Take the good stuff, leave the rest, and keep walking. And I'm going to read about what led up to that to give you guys, again, give you a perspective on your own life. When I was 13 years old, one of the high-end department stores asked me to model for their Bobby Brook line of clothing. That was my first job, and I did very well. I liked my modeling work, and they provided training on how to walk and properly exhibit their clothes. It was great. I was making some money, got my school clothes for free, and I felt good about myself. Naturally, it was too good to last. Out of nowhere, my mom stopped all of it. She told the store I would not be able to do it anymore, and that was the end of it. I didn't know why she did that, because it was very lucrative, and I was feeling good about myself. Oh, wait. I was having success and feeling good about myself. That would explain it. Just about that time, I came home from school one day and found all my Aretha Franklin records broken in half. My mom admitted to doing it, calling me racial names because I liked soul singers and had African American friends. After a fairly long period of backing off after the suicide incident, my mother was back at it again in full force. The break from her abuse had been nice while it lasted. Now I'm still a kid. I'm still in this household, this childhood. So I couldn't get out of it. It was as bad as it could get, you guys. Okay, so here is let's see where we are. This is the last one for this chapter, learning. What's learned from your challenges lasts a lifetime. It's all about the experiences. Once you have them, it's like a treasure chest of valuable riches for you to pull out just when you need them. This story is filled with examples of the many ways I applied these early experiences into my adult life that turned out to be critical to my many successes that were now just on the horizon. And so here's what led up to it. Another thing to contemplate in your own life. One day when I was in the 8th grade, I was attacked by a gang of Mexican girls on the school basketball court. They wore razor blades in their ratted up hairdos. They knocked me down on the ground and pulled the blades out of their hair to carve up my face. A lone teacher interrupted what was going on by screaming at those tough girls, telling them to stop. He saved me. Those girls were put into juvenile detention until they turned 18 years old. It was this incident that finally alerted my parents to get me out of that neighborhood and school. My dad was in the process of building our house in the foothills about 30 miles from our home in the inner city. Building the house was killer for my dad because he had to keep his regular job up at the same time. I was very worried about him, but he pulled it off. He knew the neighborhood we lived in had become too dangerous and that he had to get us out of there. I remember how nonchalant my mom was when he first came to her about building a new house and getting us out of that neighborhood. She didn't want to be bothered with all the work it was going to take. She didn't care. It wasn't affecting her. She wasn't going out of her way for anyone. She was really something else. Not long after we moved, the old neighborhood completely exploded into riots, burnings, and killings. Within 3 years, you couldn't even drive down the street for fear of getting shot. It was something like what was going on in the 60s in Haight-Ashbury and Oakland and all that, right there in the inner city of Sacramento, the capital of the state. It was a valuable lesson in learning when to hold 'em, fold 'em, walk away, or run. It gave me a heightened sense of timing. See, you learn something from everything, even if it's grim. You still learn something. From the pre-explosive times when racial tensions were building to the actual explosions, I learned the warning signs all along the way. Like the dream of me in the bubble that was just out of reach. I was not meant to be a casualty of that situation. However, I was supposed to learn I was supposed to learn from it. Yet again, I was being guided all the way along by my protectors. You can feel it when you're guided, you guys. You can feel it, even when things seem grim. And then we're going to get into chapter 7 next week. I tell you, reading this for me, living it, writing it about living it was one thing, but reading it over again and over again and over again, I'm at the point where I'm seeing it like you guys saw it. I just lived it, so I had no basis of comparison to compare it to. I just lived it and survived it and got through it and built this great relationship with my guides. Okay, that's what happened for me. And then my life really worked out great because of that connection. And I must say that the thing I came out with was gratitude beyond anything I can describe. Gratitude for making it out of that, surviving it. So, I don't know. Every time I read chapter 6, chapter 7 is going to be just as harrowing. So until we get through chapter 8, it's harrowing from 1 to 8. Okay, and guided. But it's how I learned all this, you guys. If I could make it through childhood. It was very, very strenuous. Okay, so next week. Next week is what day, Ray? Give me the day on that. It's the 23rd.
Yep.
Okay, contemplate how guidance is always working in your life. Join me again next Saturday, January 23rd at 1 p.m. on my Facebook page, my Facebook timeline, and my YouTube channel. Use the search term Linda Deer, and you're going to hopefully get a better sense of yourself in the world that we're now living in.